if you've been trying to figure out what laser to buy, there's a lot on the market. You can get 5 watts, 10 watts, and now you can get 20 and 40 watt diodes. You can get a CO2 up to 150 watts, down to 40. There's a lot of choices to pick. I happen to be in a unique position where I've used several different lasers. I've used some 5 watts that I've mounted to my CNC that's sitting right over there. I've used dedicated 10 watts. I've had 2 different 10 watt lasers. And now I have the battle of the 40 watts. To my right, we have the Monport K40. In my opinion, this is one of the best 40 watt CO2 lasers on the market. It is a K40, which means it's got a small kind of cutting envelope of about 8 by 12. It's 200 by 300 mils. But it is 40 watts, and it'll get you into the CO2 game. It'll help you to learn a lot. I'm very happy to have learned a lot on this laser. Over here, however, we have a fairly newcomer to the scene and one of the only 40 watt diode lasers on the market. That's right, this is the xTool 40 watt laser. Today, we're going to take a look at the pros and the cons to both of these lasers. We're going to take a look at the pros to the CO2 based Monport K40, and let me tell you, it does have some pros. It can do a few things that the Monport or that the xTool just can't do. But on the other side, the xTool has some things that it can do that the Monport can't do. There's also the price to think about. You know, this laser, to get a bare bones laser, is about $550. That comes with your aquarium pump and the laser. You also get a light burn compatible control board already, and you get a red dot pointer, and honestly the quality control has been pretty good on this laser. Over here, however, you're closer to that $2,000 price, and at $2,000 it's a lot of money. Now there are some nice things about the xTool that the Monport just can't offer, but we're going to dive into all of that over the next little bit. I don't exactly know how long this video is going to be. We've got a lot of footage already shot that we're going to be kind of showing you. And over all of this video, I'm going to show you both the Monport and the K40 doing the same task in most scenarios. But we are going to have some things that the xTool can do that the Monport can't, and that the Monport can do that the xTool can't. And I'll point all of that out through the voiceover. And I hope by the end of this, you'll be able to make an educated decision on which laser is best for you. There's a lot that goes into this decision, and not just money. There's upkeep, there's maintenance, there's all of this other stuff that we're going to talk about. And with all of that out of the way, it's time to get started with this video. Okay, so now look at the products I've kind of next to me here with the products that came off of the xTool, the products that came off of the Monport, side by side. As I'm showing them to you, we'll show overlay of each one with how long it took to run. Now here's what I want you to remember. These are my settings. They might not be your settings. And at that point, you might be able to get the Monport to run ever so slightly faster than the xTool, or the xTool to run ever so slightly faster. Function as such. However, with the Monport, you do have to worry about alignment as well. And that can affect the laser's performance. If your mirrors are not aligned, you're not going to get peak performance. And if you're not keeping your tube cool enough, you're not going to get peak performance either. Whereas with the xTool, the only thing you really have to worry about is lens. As long as your lens is clean and not cracked, you will be fine. And so that's a big part of the maintenance and all of that. So that's something to keep in mind. About halfway through this video, I was shooting, having to take half to fix on my Monport. I was not getting any cut through with my plywood, at least not at the far end, and I was having issues with acrylic prior to that. So take about half of the day Saturday, and then most of the day, today's Monday, we're recording, and fix that. So that's something that I ran into with Monport that is just something you can CO2 laser, but that's not something that you have to deal with a diode laser. With all of that out of the way, we're going to dive into looking at the comparison. I will meet you back here with a full breakdown of the pros and the cons of each machine. Okay, so we're going to start out doing some of the smaller projects first, and then we will go and show some of the larger projects So what we've got here, I'm going to zoom in a little bit, are two different acrylic keychains. They're both out of the exact same black acrylic. They're both engraved with semi-similar settings, but here's the thing. This is the Monport, and this is the xTool. The Monport did go deeper, so you could easily paint fill this if you wanted to, but if you didn't want to deal with paint filling and you just wanted something straight off the laser, this xTool looks fantastic. I'm very, very happy with it, and this is something that I'm actually going to be listing in my store to sell. I currently offer this style in clear acrylic, but I really like the way that it looks black, so that's going to be a new addition to the store, and this is just kind of a side-by-side comparison with the Monport right here and the xTool right here. Next, we're going to look at some leather. These are not going to be the exact same patch, but it does use the same font and show some of the similarities and the differences. So here you can see that the font looks fantastic over here, and over here it's a little bit hard to read. The overall large engraving looks great, and the stitching around the outside also looks good on both, but this is the xTool and this is the Monport. Now again, you might be able to dial in your Monport settings to where it'll look a little bit better for you personally, but for me, I'm gonna be sticking to the xTool for this one. And so if you're keeping track, that is gonna be 2 wins for the xTool, and so far none for the Monport, at least on the quality side of things. Now, again, I'm gonna say it over and over, and I've already said it once or twice here, you can potentially dial in your settings to be better, and for a $500 machine versus a $500 here, $2,000 here, they look great. You can maybe make this font a little bit bolder, make it a little bit bigger, and that could fix all of those problems with it being a little bit too thin. But I'm trying to compare apples to apples. So what I engrave on one and what I engrave on the other. So that is these leather patches. These are on pressure sensitive, heat activated adhesive on the back to use as a hat patch. So that's those. We'll go ahead and move these out of the way and dive into the first thing that only one of the machines can do. That is the Monport. This is clear acrylic. Now this was engraved on the back side and then cut out. I weeded it, and this is a keychain. This is a something on our Etsy store and on our WooCommerce store, and it is beautiful. I love it. It goes on a Stanley mug. It can go on a backpack. We've had several people get them and absolutely love them. The xTool does not have the ability in the least to do this, because what we did is we engraved, like I said, on the back, and then while it was also flipped like this so everything is perfectly aligned, the Monport came and it cut out the profile. And it does this, something like this only takes a minute and a half or so, maybe 2 minutes to do. And it is something that just is not possible with a diode laser, given how the blue beam works. You have to have a CO2 laser that works in the infrared spectrum in order to do this. So if you're looking at doing clear acrylic, just don't even consider the xTool. Consider the K40 or another CO2 based laser. Monport has several. If the K40 is too small, you can go up to a larger size, more power to get things done faster. So definitely something to keep in mind, but we cannot do this on the xTool. On the train of things that cannot be done on some of the lasers, we have, and I'll zoom out for this one, this mug. This mug is not possible to do on the Monport. You can't hook up a rotary, at least not one that Monport sells. I know you can kind of jerry-rig a rotary in there, but there's just not a lot of room, and it's hard to adjust the height and stuff. So this, for all intents and purposes, is not compatible with the Monport. I did this on the xTool using the RA2 rotary, and it worked fantastic. It started out just looking like this, just pure red. We engraved that away and got this gorgeous engraving here. And this is for my local church where I work as a youth pastor. We needed some of these cups, so I was able to do them, and it came out fantastic. I wish I could get some of those reflections off of there, but it looks really, really good. And again, this is something that you can't really do on the Monport K40. Not that it's not capable of it. The machine would work with it just fine, but it's going to be hard to find a rotary attachment that'll work well with a K40. Next, we're going to look at some Christmas ornaments. This one right here, and this one right here. Now, this is something else that I've noticed using the diode. Let me kind of get this positioned here. This is from the Monport, and this is from the xTool. The xTool, I've noticed most diodes engrave darker than a CO2 laser, and that can be both a benefit and a drawback, depending on what you're going after. Neither of these woods were treated with anything. They were both masked before engraving and cutting, and overall took about the same amount of time. So something to just keep in mind is you're going to get a darker engraving without having to use borax or anything like that on a diode versus a CO2. But the details and everything, they both look fantastic. I would be happy to sell either one of these. This is a design that we're going to be selling on our store in the upcoming fall, winter season. So as we approach Christmas, and it's also just a good reminder that Christmas does begin with Christ. I am a Christian, like I said, I'm a youth pastor, and so these are going to be a lot of what you see, as well as the hat patches being Bible verses and stuff. That's kind of what we focus on here. So now we're going to go ahead and move these things out, and don't pay attention to the fact that one of these has a lot of overburn and one of them doesn't. I did not mask both of them. I only masked one of them. But these are just some table placement signs. And again, these cut out at about the same time. I went twice as fast, but with 2 passes on the Monport, and half as fast, but 1 pass on the xTool, and they both work well, and they both cut out well. This is what I ended up having to do the mirror realignment for, because I wasn't getting a cutout on the far side, but still, it came out great once I got those mirrors aligned. And if you're wanting to cut plywood, this works fantastic. This is 1/8 inch from Smoky Hill, and it works great. I love it. It works fantastic. And so if this is something that you're looking for, really you can't go wrong with either laser. And then last but not least, we have some Slate. And so here are our 2 Slate coasters. And this one right here is from the Monport. This one right here is from the xTool. The xTool is a little bit brighter. I don't exactly know why that is, but it is a little brighter in what it looks like. But overall, the fine details on both of them are perfect. I would be happy to put either of these in my store. Like I've already said with many of the products, these came out great. And so really, we have a tie on everything except for the leather and the black acrylic. The leather and the black acrylic, I give the xTool the leg up on, as well as the mug. But for everything else and the clear acrylic, you really just can't go wrong with either. Well, clear acrylic for Monport only, but you can't go wrong with either of them. So that's kind of all for the side-by-sides here. And with that, we'll go ahead and dive into the last and final section of this video with the pros and the cons list. Okay, it is time to dive into the pros and cons, and excuse the use of the phone. I kind of wrote out some thoughts here that I didn't want to miss. But you've already seen now the lasers running, and you've also seen the results of the lasers. So now really the pros and the cons. So we're going to start off with the xTool. We're going to hit pros and cons. Then we're going to go to the Monport K40, pros and cons, and then kind of wrap it all up in a conclusion of which laser I think you should buy. For the xTool, the main pro for me is no mirrors. I never have to worry about, are my mirrors aligned? Do I have to worry about that? How long is it going to take to get them aligned? I don't have to worry about any mirror alignment whatsoever with the xTool. It's a diode laser, so I just tell it to go and it goes. I do occasionally have to clean the lens, but that's easy and simple. Another pro of the xTool is it goes down to about 1% power. This means that you have a much wider range of engraving power choices, if you want to say it that way. Goes down to about 1% power, and that's something that some of the higher end CO2 lasers can do, but the Monport just doesn't have that ability, and we'll dive into why and when we're in the Monport pros and cons. There's no water cooling, there's no glass tube that you have to worry about with the xTool, and that's kind of big. I have a active chiller on my Monport, Again, we'll get into that here in a little bit, but you don't need any of that. You just kind of go. It doesn't matter what climate you're in or any of that. You just build the laser and you go. It's larger, so it has a bigger engraving size. About 400 by 430 millimeters, give or take, is what the Monport, or is what the xTool can do, because it is a open frame diode. So it's got a much bigger area, and being an open frame diode, you can just set it on a larger piece. I did a big stove board for somebody, and I set the xTool right on top of it, and it went to town, and it looks great. Can't do that with the Monport. It supports the rotary, like we've already talked about. xTool sells a rotary, it plugs right in, it's easy to use. You can just adjust the Z height, comes with risers for the feet, and you're ready to go in just a few minutes. There's built-in air assist support with the xTool, so especially with the 40 watt, which is what we're comparing against, it comes with that support for it. You can either use your own kit, I've got the xTool kit for it, and air assist is a must-have. I've got it on the Monport, we'll talk about that in a minute, but it's built in for support for the xTool. And Z height adjustment. You don't really have Z height adjustment on the Monport. The xTool you do, and you can just set it up on books like I've already talked about. You can build your own things. You can 3D print riser feet. You can buy riser feet. You can make it as tall or as short as you want. That's just not something that the Monport offers. Now for some cons of the xTool, because there are cons. You can't do anything with clear, blue, or white. If you have clear, blue, or white acrylic, you can just write it off. You're not going to be able to use it. It's a waste of time. Don't try. There's some people out there who say that they can. I wouldn't even fuss with it. Just don't even worry about it. If you want to do clear, blue, or white, get a CO2 laser. Don't get a diode laser. It's not worth the hassle. It is much more expensive than the Monport. Like I said at the beginning, you're going to be paying about $2,000 for the xTool, and you pay about $550 for the Monport. Now that $2,000 does not include an enclosure either. So you're gonna have to build one or buy one. You can see behind me, this is the official xTool enclosure. So that's what I have, and that's gonna add another couple $100 to it. And so you need to keep that and factor that in. So now you're close to or over $2,000 for the xTool. And we'll talk about some alternatives to either of these lasers if you have that kind of budget at the end of this video. Now let's go ahead and start with the pros of the Monport. You can do clear, white, and blue, no problem. Acrylic, you can do wood, you can do leather, you can do slate, you can do anything, metal, anything that the diode laser is capable of, the Monport is capable of, if not more capable of. In a lot of scenarios, just because of the way the infrared module works. When I'm doing masked plywood for those ornaments, I have to run the xTool at a slower speed and higher power to get through that light colored masking. That's not something you have to do on the Monport, because the Monport is a infrared CO2 laser, so it just goes straight through. It doesn't care if there's masking there. As well as you can do the clear, blue, and white acrylic. So something to keep in mind. It is much cheaper. Like I said, it's about $550 to $2,000. Supports more materials. We've already talked about that. And then the biggest thing that I think is the benefit with starting with a cheaper CO2 laser is it helps you to learn how to use a CO2 laser. When I eventually upgrade to a larger CO2 laser, that's in the plans, I'm trying to work some things out for that. I already know how to do mirror alignment. I already know how to do the cooler. I already know how to change a tube. I already know how to do all those things. So I learned all of that with this lower cost laser. And that is nice to know, because as soon as you go up to, let's say, an 80 watt Monport or 100 watt Monporter, you eventually go into something like a Thunder laser or an Aeon or any of those other brands, Epilogue, whatever you get, you will know how they function. You'll already know how to do it all. And I'd say that's pretty invaluable if you plan to grow your business that far. If you don't plan to grow your business, then that's not gonna do you a lot of good. If this is just a hobby, then stick with a diode. But that is something that I'm very happy that I have the knowledge of now. And then for the cons of the K40, you have the fact that it's water cooled. Like I said, I have to have a full water chiller. I started with just a the submersible pump in a bucket, and that worked in the winter. But then I was having some issues with it, and I worked with Monport since they are sponsoring this Monport series, which is the last video in that series officially. And so we worked together. They sent me out just a regular, the CW 3200 chiller or 3000 chiller, and I used that for a little bit. But in Tennessee, I don't know if you can see it, I am sweating. It's about 87 degrees in the shop today, and not a lot of airflow, so I wasn't giving a lot of air to the microphones. So with that, the laser, I'll step over here and take a look, is 32.5 degrees Celsius right now is what it's reading. So when you're using something like the lower cost, $150, $200 CW 3000 chiller, you're not getting active chilling. It's moving the water through, and it has some fans that blow over a radiator, and that's it. You're not gonna really get below ambient temperature. So I can't run this laser at 32 degrees. I'm gonna crack that tube. So because of that, we had to upgrade to 5200 chiller. And that is what's called an active chiller. It has refrigerant, it has all active cooling in it, so that way everything can work the way that it needs to, and you can keep it cold. So when I'm running the laser, I'm running at about 17.5 to 18 degrees Celsius, which is the optimal temperature for it, and it works fantastic. But that's about $400 to get. Now once you have that, you will be ready for a bigger laser. The 5200 can handle up to the 150 watt lasers, so you don't have to rebuy another chiller when you get a bigger laser. You'll already have it, so that's a benefit. But that does essentially double the cost of the Monport. So that's something to keep in mind. You've got a glass tube, so you've got to be a little more careful with it. In the winter, you can't just let your garage get as cold as you want, because if there's water in that tube still, that water's going to expand, crack, and you're going to come back out and you're not going to have a laser to use. Those tubes can be a couple $100s as well. And again, you've got the mirrors to align, and so that's just, it can be a headache. The mirrors and the mirror mounts that come with the Monport are not the best, honestly. It's what you expect on a lower cost laser, but they're just not the best. And a lot of people end up upgrading those mirrors, but that adds more cost. And so it really depends on what you want to do, but the mirrors and the alignment they're annoying. They really are, and that's something to keep in mind as you enter the realm of CO2 lasers. When you get up to the bigger CO2 lasers, they are still annoying. They are nicer, the adjustments are a little bit easier, they can hold adjustments a little bit better. You can get the upgraded mounts for the Monport, so it can hold adjustments a little bit better, but again, added cost, so it just depends on where you're at with that. Smaller work area, you've got 200 by 300 mil. As your maximum work envelope, and that's it. You can't go any bigger, you can't really expand it. There are people out there that expand these to 12 by 24, and that's nice and all, but that's gonna take a lot of work to be able to do. You have to cut these things up, you have to get new tubes, you have to build new things. It's a lot of work, a lot more money, and so that's just something to keep in mind, that you're limited to that 200 by 300 or approximately 8 by 12 area. And you can't put anything bigger than that in there either, because you can't, just the way the frame's built, you just can't do that. No native Z height adjustment. That's just another big con. There is a table on the stock K40s that you can open up some jaws and slip something a lot smaller than 200 by 300 in there. But I removed that table. I did put a motorized Z height table. That cost me about $200, $250 to install. I'm gonna be doing a future video on that, on the install, how to wire it into your stock motherboard, how to use that with light burn, what settings you need and all that. That is coming. But again, that added about $200, $250 to the cost of this laser. Something to keep in mind. And then finally, the last con for the Monport is, even though it has stock, the red light pointer so that way you can see where it is, there's no air assist. Now I 3D printed an air assist adapter for a couple pennies, and that works great if you've got a 3D printer. People on Etsy sell those, but it's not stock. You have to add it after the fact. You can either buy a nozzle, you can add a nozzle if you print it yourself, you can just buy a whole new lens that has it with the lens housing, but it's not their stock. So again, added cost. At the end of the day though, which laser should you choose? It's up to you. When you get the K40 for $550 or so, if there's no sales running or whatever, and we do have a discount code down in the description below. I'll put the code right here. It's Created Workshop 10. If you use that at Monport, you get 10% off. So that can save some cash. But for $550 retail, you get the laser with the 40-watt tube with the red dot pointer. You do get a light burn control board, which most K40s don't have. So that's very nice to have. And so you get that, and that's it. There's a little fan on the back to help with fume extraction, but that's it. You get no air assist, you get no knife bed, you get no adjustable Z height, you get none of that. That's all gonna be added cost. And that's where the kind of the thing with the K40 comes in. If you're wanting to run a small business, you're gonna get nickel and dimed to kit this out how it needs to be for a small business. By the time I added air assist, that added about $40 to get the pump and the hosing and print the stuff. And then I added the Z table, that was about another $200. And you know, I have full-on extraction, which that adds some money. You'll need that for either laser though. So overall, I'm looking at about $300 on top of the $550. Now I'm inching close to that $1,000 mark for the laser, and it's still a fantastic laser for $1,000. It's better than any diode laser you can get at $1,000 if you can work with that small size. That small size has caused me problems before. When I'm working on license plate frames, I've got to be very crafty in how I position it all because it's small. So if you can work in that 8x12 space, it's a great laser, but you're gonna have to do a lot to it to get it to that kind of small business level of running. If you're a hobbyist, it works great. You can have time to tinker with all of it and all that, but you know, keep that in mind. Now, on the flip side, the xTool is great for a small business. It's got a bigger area, 400 by 430. You can have as much Z height as you want. So if you're doing something thicker, you can easily just stack things up and go. But at the same time, you're at that 2,000-ish price range. You add a honeycomb bed, you add air assist, the rotary, you're closer to 2,500, and you can't do clear acrylic or any of that. So that's something to keep in mind. But at that $2,000 price, if you add about 500, maybe another 1,000, you can get something like Monport's 60-watt CO2 laser. That's a bigger envelope that will do more. That is still CO2, so you can do clear acrylic, white acrylic, blue acrylic. You don't have to worry about having to up your power. It's got what's called a Rudia controller instead of a Gerbil controller. And so diode lasers run on Gerbil controllers, which is exactly what the Monport K40 runs on. Gerbil works great. It's the cheapest light burn license you can get if you're going to use it with light burn, but it's not really designed to run a CO2 laser. When you're running a Rudia controller, you can set minimum and maximum power. So as you're going, you know, into a corner, it will lower the power so that way it's not doubling over itself and burning through. You just have a lot more ability with a Rudia controller. That's not something that you get with the K40, and it's not something that you need with the diode at all. So that's not something to worry about there. But the whole point is for about 500 to 1,000 more than the xTool, you can get that 60 watts. So you're getting 20 more watts, you're getting 50% more power, you're getting CO2, you're getting a bigger bed, you're getting built in all of these other features. You're getting rotary support for things like the Rotoboss you'll be able to use, which is a much nicer rotary than even the RA2. And so if you're really wanting to jumpstart a small business and you've got that little bit of extra capital, I would say skip this, skip the 40-watt diode, skip the 40-watt CO2, and jump straight into the 60. If you're working with less than $1,000, I would say skip most of the diodes unless you're hobbyist only. At that $1,000 price range, you're at the 10 to 20 watt diodes, so you're gonna blow it away in speed when you go to a Monport K40. So if you're at that $1,000 range, I would say go with the Monport. If you're at the $500 range, go with the Monport. Make sure to use the coupon code in the description below to get it at that about $500 price range. If you're at that 2,000, you just can't move from that 2,000. You need the best power and you want the easiest to use and something that's bigger. You can actually expand this to be about 930 by 400. So you can get, you know, 24 or 30 long-ish. And so you can do that with the xTool. It's a fantastic laser. I just feel it's a little high in price when you can get a 60 watt CO2 for not much more. At the end of the day though, get what works best for your setup. If you don't have the extra 5 active chiller and you're somewhere like Tennessee or Texas or Florida, it's gonna be hard to keep that Monport cool. just being honest, unless it's in a conditioned space. And so then it might not work that well in that scenario. If you want to do clear acrylic, don't go with the xTool because you just can't do it. I know that there's a lot in this video. This has been one of my longer videos on here. And I know at the end of this, I'm not really giving you a definitive buy this one or buy this one because I can't. It's really going to come down to what works best for you. And here's the thing, I hate that answer. I wish that I could tell you the xTool sucks, just get the Monport, or the Monport is just not worth it, just get the xTool, but I can't. They are both fantastic at what they do in different ways. Now, if you're only going to do black acrylic and you want to engrave it and cut it, the xTool looks way better than the Monport coming out as the finished product. If all you're going to do is leather hat patches, get the xTool and not the Monport. You can fit a larger piece of leather on there, and it looks crisper. If you're going to be doing plywood, it really depends on what you're going to go with. They both offer very similar power and capability, so you can go either way. You can fit more onto the xTool than you can the Monport. So kind of just go with whatever you feel is best for your business. Don't let me tell you what to buy. Instead, use the information in this video that I've provided and all of that, and kind of compile your own list of what you are looking for in a laser. At the end of the day, both being 40 watt, they're going to have very similar speeds in most of what they do. The xTool engraved the slate ever so slightly faster, and the Monport engraved the slate ever so slightly faster than the xTool, but I like the result of the xTool a little bit better. I can use jigs on the xTool, I can't use that on the Monport. I can go on and on. This video is already probably going to be about 25 or 30 minutes long, so I'm going to go ahead and wrap it up here. I hope this video has been a help to you. If you have any questions on either of these lasers, I'll have links in the descriptions below on where you can buy them, and I will be in the comments with you. I don't have some of the lasers I've used in previous videos anymore. These two lasers, however, are not going to go anywhere anytime soon. Even if I upgrade to a bigger laser, I will still keep them in my arsenal for some of the smaller tasks around the shop. I hope you found this video useful. If you did, I would really appreciate a thumbs up and a subscription if you feel so inclined. I would love to know what you think about this video in the comments below. What other things would you like to see? This doesn't have to be my only video on comparisons. If you want to see something specific, you can leave a comment down below, and if it's something that I can do, I'll go ahead and add it to my board, and we'll get it scheduled for something that's a more specific comparison. Doing a deeper dive as to, dialing in your speeds and feeds for plywood or whatever. So I would love to hear from you down there. Thank you again for watching. We'll catch you in the next one.